So Season 2 Episode 3 of Helluva Boss just came out. Sitting at 25 minutes long, it's the longest episode to date, and similarly, it's the most story focused. Like with my other reviews, I'm going to give a quick rundown of what happens in the episode, and then I'll move on to talk about the things I liked and disliked about it. So immediately we have Moxie and Millie talking about how she ran into an ex. Blitz interrupts and says how they have a client in the greed ring. A helicopter shows up, blows a hole in the wall, and picks IMP up. Luna doesn't join the crew since she's too busy on her phone. As the helicopter flies through Greed, we get to see a view of the ring. We see the remains of Lululand from Season 1 Episode 2, along with the population of the Greed ring going about their day-to-day lives. Moxie reveals he grew up in the Greed ring, and he realizes that the client is his father, Crimson. Crimson meets IMP, and we realize he's a mob boss. We then get the introduction of Chaz, who was Millie's ex from earlier, and he also dated Moxie. We also get the first reveal of Moxie's mother and a young version of himself. We get a flashback where we see how Moxie and Chaz met and began dating. We see Chaz betray Moxie, which lands him in prison. This is how Moxie met Blitz and started IMP. Crimson reveals that he wants to bring Chaz into the family. IMP are sent to their rooms apart from Moxie. Moxie and Crimson have an argument, and Crimson reveals he wants to force Moxie to marry Chaz for his money. It was alluded to before subtly, but this is the first time it's revealed to us that Crimson is an evil character. We get a flashback sequence to Moxie's childhood. We see his mum cut his food up for him and how his parents don't get on well together. Moxie's mum is training him how to shoot until Crimson tries to force him to shoot another person. Moxie's mum refuses and takes him away. We see the parents fight and Moxie's mum leaves. We get a sad scene where Crimson forces Moxie to drown another imp. We then see Moxie's mother's shoe float to the surface, so it's likely that Crimson killed her in the same lake previously. Chaz tries to get it on with Moxie and sings the first song of the episode, Chaz Time. Moxie refuses and Chaz goes to sleep with Blitz instead. Blitz steals Chaz's keys and goes to the car where he finds out that Chaz isn't rich and is trying to scam Crimson. Chaz injects Blitz with a serum to make him sleepy. Moxie then tells Crimson he won't marry Chaz and gets tased. Moxie is forced into a wedding dress and held hostage at the wedding area. Millie and Blitz get into the car and save Moxie with the second song of the episode, Crashing a Wedding, playing at the same time. We get an epic sequence where Millie kills the shark bodyguards and saves Moxie. Blitz reveals that Chaz isn't rich. The team head back to their headquarters and see Luna, who was sitting in the same chair the entire episode. Lastly, Crimson hangs Chaz's teeth up on the wall, meaning that he killed him. He then throws a knife at Moxie's portrait on the wall. This marks Moxie as his next target, and Crimson as another major antagonist within the show. So, with the entire plot of the episode recapped, it's time to move on to my thoughts on the episode, starting with the things I liked. The first thing is that the episode sits at 25 minutes. It was the longest episode yet, and I think that helped the overall plot progression tremendously. One of my criticisms of the past two episodes was the pacing issues, especially in Seeing Stars. This episode flowed well and had no pacing issues, and I think the additional runtime helped it a lot. Secondly, I think the writing was a step up from previous episodes. Most of the jokes landed better, especially the ones made by Blitz. Similarly, it was nice to see the IMP crew go back to their duties as a killing business. The last couple episodes felt detached from this concept, so it was a nice change of pace. This episode could have been placed in Season 1, such as after Episode 5, and I think it would have fit in thematically. One thing which stands this episode out from every episode before it is the wonderful scenery. This episode has the most effort put into the world building and backgrounds, hands down. The only one that could come close would be the Has-Been Hotel pilot. The Has-Been pilot has details poured into the backgrounds like long streets, huge buildings, and brilliant architecture. This episode is on par. This is seen clear as day at the beginning of the episode. We start off in the Pride Ring with its large cityscape and red sky. This is immediately contrasted with the green hue of the Greed Ring. The red imps contrast very well against the green backdrops and shark characters. The overall lighting of the episode was also fantastic. You can tell the team put a lot of work into making the world feel alive. My favourite example is the imps' glowing eyes during specific scenes. This, combined with the variety of shadows, means that the world feels lived in, and the characters stand out a lot better. As always, the animation was well done in this episode. I especially loved the scenes that looked almost 3D, like when Crimson hangs Chaz's teeth on the wall and it slowly pans around to him throwing a knife at the portrait. Another example was when Crimson orders his goons to fight Millie. I genuinely had a smile on my face seeing these epic scenes unfold. They definitely outdid themselves this time. The fight scene especially was a joy to watch. I think it was way better than the one during episode 6 with the dorks. One thing this episode benefits greatly from is the use of foreshadowing and references to past sequences. We saw Lululand from episode 2, and the episode as a whole calls back to statements Moxie made in the past, such as when he said he had a mobster family and that he wanted his parents dead. Although the pilot might not be entirely canon, it was cool to see plot points mentioned previously get expanded upon. One of Helluva Boss's best narrative points is its clever use of storytelling related to its villains. Crimson is a perfect example of this. I love his 1920s mobster charm, and I think Richard Horvitz nailed his voice. Crimson, like some of the other villains, is just genuinely an evil character. He reminds me a bit of Stella or Stryker, where they give off bad vibes when you first encounter them, and this becomes true later when they reveal their evil nature. Similarly to episode 5, where Stryker hints he'll return, Crim throws a knife at Moxie's portrait, which sets him up as a feature antagonist. I can't wait to see what he'll do next. I thought Chaz was alright. I'll discuss some of the issues I have with him in the negative section, but I thought the voice actor did a decent job and his design is quite cool. Adam Nayland, the writer for the episode, says Chaz might appear in future episodes in flashbacks, which is nice to hear. Speaking of flashbacks, this episode utilises them really well. My favourite flashback in particular is the sad one where Moxie has to drown an imp. It really reiterates to the audience how bad Crimson is and provides clarification on Moxie's personality. In past episodes, such as Murder Family, we saw that Moxie didn't want to harm children or families for no reason. Furthermore, his overall temperament is quite soft and submissive. This is because he takes after his mother and doesn't want to become like his father. The boat scene especially was quite heartbreaking, and I felt a sick feeling in my stomach when I saw his mother's shoe float to the surface. The flashbacks were used quite well to provide additional lore to already existing plot points. One example being when Moxie is arrested and meets Blitz in prison. This was cool to see, and I hope we get some more in the future that will explain how Millie got introduced to Moxie and joined IMP. I also think this episode provided a lot of character development for Millie. I've seen people complain that she was sidelined away as Moxie's wife, and I just don't agree. I think the couple work quite well because they have opposite personality traits. Millie is quite dominant and loves violence, whereas Moxie is submissive and only kills when he has to. I think the pair supplement each other's weaknesses and strengths. VivzyPop saw some of the criticism towards Millie and did a long Twitter thread about it. I'll have the tweets on screen, but basically she says that there will be a couple more Millie-centered episodes in the future, and she clarifies a little on the story developments of the characters. With the positives out of the way, I want to talk about some of the negatives and things I didn't like about the episode. The first is that I feel like the songs in this episode were hit or miss. I know not every episode is going to have a banger song, but I feel like this episode missed the mark. In particular, the song that played every time Chaz spoke was obnoxious. The only time I found it funny was when it got cut off when Millie shut the door. Chaz's other song, Chaz Time, wasn't great. I don't think it holds a candle to other songs like Vacay to Bone Town or Ozzy's song. The second song, Crashing a Wedding, was well made and fitted the scene better with the chaotic killing, but I again think it was just average. The two songs aren't bad by any means, but I just think they're weaker than other songs we've heard so far. The second thing is I think that there was some tonal inconsistency. The biggest example of this was right after the sad flashback. When I first watched the episode, I was distraught after seeing the young Moxie flashback scene with his mother. This was immediately ruined by the jump back to the room with the dildos. I feel like in this case it ruined any build-up that was created from the traumatic scene of Moxie's childhood. A similar comparison would be in Season 2, Episode 2, Seeing Stars. I mentioned this in my review of that episode, but you have the emotional, heartfelt scene of Octavia and Luna talking. Then, immediately after, we see Luna kick Blitz in the nuts. It's a complete tonal shift, and it acts like the entire conversation with Octavia didn't even happen, and undercuts the impact. Similarly to episodes 1 and 2 of this season, I feel like the animation was a little inconsistent. I mentioned this in my review for the previous episode, but you can tell which animators animated which sequences. If you compare the scene of Blitz walking to the helicopter to any of the scenes featuring Crimson, you can see the difference. It's pretty clear that the team has hired some new animators to help, and they're obviously skilled and really talented. But I think it'll just take some time for them to get accustomed to the spindle horse style that we all know and love. The next couple of criticisms I'm going to mention are ones I've seen floating around. I don't necessarily believe in them, but I just thought it would be worthwhile to include them. One casting choice which was criticised was Richard Horvitz as Crimson. Personally, it didn't bother me enough to take me out of the episode, but I've seen people say it was jarring. A comparison I can think of is when Richard voiced Moxie and the kid in the pilot. In that instance, it felt confusing hearing the same voice talk back and forth. This time I didn't mind it, but to others it was immersion breaking because if you closed your eyes, it felt like Moxie was almost talking to himself. One thing as well was the lack of Luna. Luna has only been in the pilot, episode 1, 3, 5, 6, and season 2, episode 2. In most of these episodes, she just played a side role or was barely on screen. In this episode, Luna didn't say a single word. The final one is the Moxie fat joke. I've seen people criticize this one before, and it was brought up again in this episode. Personally, I don't have a problem with this joke. I think it's just another running gag, similar to Blitz's wall getting blown up, but it was something I saw people argue over. So that's my thoughts in the newest episode of Helluva Boss. I think that overall it's one of the better episodes of the show, and the best episode of the season thus far. I don't think it's completely flawless, but I think the criticisms were minor enough to where they could be addressed in future episodes. So what do you think? Do you agree with some of the points I mentioned? If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, feel free to leave them down below in the comments. Thanks for watching.